When you really look at Nepal, beyond the incredible mountains, there's this just amazing diversity of cultures packed into those hills and valleys.
It really is extraordinary.
And today, we thought we'd zoom right in, do a deep dive into one specific group.
Absolutely. We're focusing on the Kirati people, primarily found in eastern Nepal.
Right. And our guide for this is actually a chapter from a well-known book, People of Nepal, by Dor Bahadur Bista.
Yes, that specific chapter, it really lays out a lot about the Kirati, their history, how their society is structured, their customs. It's quite detailed.
It is. And we know listeners want to get the core information efficiently, so that's the plan. Pull out the most compelling insights from this chapter. Okay, so kicking things off, who exactly are the Kirati people we're discussing?
Well, they're a major ethnic group in Nepal, and most people would probably know them by the names Rai and Limbu.
Rai and Limbu, okay.
Together, they actually form one of the largest single ethnic groups in the country. But it's also important to remember that within Rai and Limbu, there are lots of smaller tribal units called Thar.
Thar. Got it. So Rai and Limbu are the big umbrella groups with these Thar subdivisions within them.
Precisely. The chapter really focuses on Rai and Limbu as the two main Thar or groups in this context.
And the names themselves, Rai and Limbu, the chapter suggests they mean something more.
Yeah, there's a bit of history there. Rai can technically mean headman, but like you said, it's also used as the general term for the whole group.
Yep.
And similarly, Limbu can also mean chief or headman. So when Bista talks about the Kirati people here, he's focusing on Rai and Limbu, not, say, Rai and Suba, even though Suba is another title we'll probably touch on.
So it's like a leadership title kind of became the name for the people.
That seems to be the idea, yes. The chapter points to work by Northey and Morris on the Gurkhas.
Right, I saw that reference.
They noted how the Shah rulers, after conquering areas, would appoint local Kirati leaders, giving them titles like Jimda or Suba. But the terms Rai for Rai leaders and Limbu for Limbu leaders were used so consistently that eventually those titles just sort of stuck to the entire communities.
Interesting how administration can shape ethnic identity like that.
Yeah.
What about their deeper origins? Where did the Kirati come from? The chapter mentions a few ideas.
Yeah, there are a couple of main lines of thought. One connects them possibly to Tibet, based on, Tibeto-Burman languages, and some physical characteristics often described as Mongoloid features.
Okay, the Tibet connection.
But there's also strong evidence, including from Kirati sources like the Kiran-Veda, suggesting they have a very, very long history within Nepal itself. They're not recent arrivals.
So deeply rooted in the region.
Absolutely. They're even mentioned in ancient Hindu texts like the Ramayana and Mahabharata and old Nepali chronicles. It points to a really ancient presence.
Wow. And didn't the chapter mention a Kirati kingdom even ruling the Kathmandu Valley way back?
Yes. That was fascinating. They apparently ruled the valley until around the 2nd century AD.
That long ago.
And then later, there was another important Kirati kingdom based in Bijapur in the east. Its territory covered parts of today's Koshi, Mechi, and Sagarmatha zones.
So a significant regional power.
For quite some time, yes, until it was eventually annexed by the expanding Kingdom of Nepal late in the 18th century. It's a classic story of regional powers being absorbed into a larger state.
A really deep history. Okay, so that historical kingdom was eventually absorbed, and now they're concentrated more geographically, right? Where does the chapter say they mainly live today, or, well, based on its time frame?
The focus is definitely eastern Nepal. That's the heartland for both Rai and Limbu.
And did it give any sense of their numbers back then?
It quotes some figures from the 1952-54 census. Let's see, over 236,000 Rai and about 145,500 Limbu.
So really significant populations even then.
Oh, definitely. One of the major groups. These numbers, while old, give a sense of their demographic weight at the time.
And within eastern Nepal, did the Rai and Limbu tend to live in different areas?
Yes, there were traditional patterns. The Rai were more concentrated in the Middle Hill regions, an area sometimes called Munch Kirant or Middle Kirant.
Munch Kirant, okay.
The Limbu, on the other hand, were generally found further east in areas bordering India's West Bengal and Sikkim. They traditionally called their region the 10 Limbu lands.
So distinct traditional territories even within the broader Kirati area. What about their villages? Any descriptions?
The Rai villages are often described as being at higher altitudes, say between 3,000 and 6,000 feet.
Higher up.
Yeah. And their houses are typically stone-built, often 2 stories, with slate or maybe thatched roofs. Villages often follow the line of a ridge.
You can picture that. And the Limbu.
Limbu villages, according to the chapter, were more commonly found on high slopes, often near the Timor River and its tributaries. Maybe slightly different locations, different settings.
Okay, let's shift to daily life then. What does the chapter tell us about how the Rai specifically lived day to day, their economy?
Well, agriculture was absolutely central. Their houses, those stone structures we mentioned, would contain essential household items, things made of brass, iron, pottery.
Standard household goods.
Right. And fetching water was a major daily chore, sometimes involving these long bamboo pipes to channel it. But farming was the backbone. They cultivated both dry fields, relying on rain, and wet fields, irrigated
What
ones.
were they growing mostly?
The staples were maize, millet, wheat, and rice. Pretty standard hill crops,
Huh?
but they also grew vegetables, fruits like oranges, bananas, jackfruit, guavas, and tobacco too.
And didn't the chapter mention their terracing? That sounds
Mhm.
crucial on those
Oh,
hillsides.
absolutely crucial. It highlights their skill in building terraces to farm on incredibly steep slopes,
Yeah,
a real feat of engineering and adaptation.
definitely. What about other activities? Anything besides farming?
Weaving was very important, especially for women, providing clothes and textiles for the family.
Makes sense.
And the chapter mentions adornments, too. Ray women often wearing red glass bead necklaces and silver jewelry like earrings and rings.
Were they entirely self-sufficient in their villages, or did they travel for work?
There was definitely seasonal movement. People would travel down to the Terai, the plains in the south, looking for wage labor or to trade goods.
So supplementing the farm income.
Exactly. And their farming methods were traditional, using bullocks to plow, simple tools often made locally.
Now, you mentioned a term earlier, kipat, this communal land system. Can you unpack that a bit?
Right, the Kipat system. It's described as this traditional Kirati way of owning land communally.
Communally, so not individual ownership.
Primarily, yes. The community held the land, and historically, this often meant it was tax-free within their area, though they did usually have an obligation to give a small payment or tribute to the local Ray chief, the Ray.
So collective rights, but still a local leader involved. It sounds quite different from, say, later land tenures systems in Nepal.
It really is. It points to a different social and economic organization. But the chapter also notes that not everyone was a landowner, even under Kipat. Some people rented land or worked as laborers for others.
Okay, so internal variation.
And it's important to note the Kipat system itself faced huge changes over time due to government policies and land reforms, but its historical influence was massive.
Understood. Any other ways they boosted their income?
Yes, raising livestock was common cattle, goats, chickens. That provided food and some income.
Right.
And significantly, remittances from family members serving abroad, in British and Indian Gurkha regiments or in the Nepali police and army, that became a very important income source.
The Gurkha connection, right.
Yeah. And within the community, there were traditional ways of borrowing and lending, often with interest.
And throughout all this, the chapter kind of emphasizes their character, doesn't it?
It does. It often mentions the Raya reputation for being brave, resilient, hardy people. You get a sense of them being very well adapted to a tough environment.
Okay, let's move into their social structure a bit more. You mentioned the Tsar subdivisions earlier. How did the hierarchy work?
It seems the Rai society was organized into these numerous thar. And these thar weren't just random groupings. They were often tied to specific places.
Like a particular valley or area?
Exactly, a river valley or a group of nearby settlements. The book actually lists quite a few thar and the locations they were associated with. It shows a strong link between kinship and place.
And how did belonging to a specific Tsar affect things like marriage?
It was pretty significant that thar were largely endogamous.
Meaning they married within their own Tsar.
Generally, yes, that was the preference, the common practice. There were also rules about descent, tracing lineage back 7 generations.
7 generations. Why was that important?
It determined marriage eligibility. You generally couldn't marry someone who shared an ancestor within those 7 generations. It was a way to prevent unions considered too close, incestuous.
A clear system then. What were the main ways marriages happened?
Arranged marriage was very common, especially for boys who might get married quite young, maybe 13 to 15.
That young. Wow.
Yeah. But marriage by capture or by elopement also happened, so there were other routes besides formal arrangement.
Marriage by capture sounds
Yeah.
intense. How do the arranged ones usually work?
Typically, the boy's family would initiate things. They'd approach the girl's family. A key moment was offering rakshi, the traditional drink.
The alcohol offering.
Yes. If the girl's parents accepted the rakshi, that basically meant they agreed to the proposal.
A clear signal.
Then, often a Brahmin astrologer would be consulted to pick an auspicious day for the wedding.
Interesting use of an astrologer there. What about the wedding itself? Any specific rituals mentioned?
There'd be a procession, often with music, taking the groom to the bride's house. He'd bring gifts for her family.
Right.
And there was often a key ritual right at the threshold of the bride's house involving a chicken and banana leaf symbolic actions to finalize the union.
Threshold rituals, often very meaningful.
And among one group, the Kulung Rai, paying a bride price called darji, was customary.
What about elopement, if a couple just ran off?
Well, that obviously bypassed the formal process, so afterwards there would usually need to be negotiations between the families to sort things out, recognize the marriage, and smooth over any issues.
Makes sense. Society finds a way to adapt.
The chapter also briefly notes practices like junior levirate, a man marrying his deceased younger brother's widow, and junior sororate, a woman marrying her deceased younger sister's widower, ways to keep people within the family structure.
Social safety nets, in a way.
Okay.
Turning to beliefs now, religion. The chapter says they have their own traditions despite outside influences.
Exactly. They've definitely been influenced by Lamaistic Buddhism from the north and Hinduism from the south. You can't live alongside other cultures without some exchange.
Yeah.
But the Rai have maintained their own distinct core beliefs. They worship local deities, nature spirits, and especially ancestor spirits, which are collectively called Nwagi.
Nuwagi. Ancestor spirits. Are there household gods too?
Yes. The idea of Kamang is mentioned as a household deity, kind of a protector of the home.
And are there big annual ceremonies?
Oh, yes. There's an annual cycle. Bhumi Puja is important. That's earth worship, usually done in the autumn, around September, October, to ensure good harvests.
Praying for the crops.
Right? And various kinds of home, which involve sacrifices, are performed for different purposes.
What about those likwamang rituals mentioned? What were they for?
Those seem specifically focused on protecting children from diseases like measles or smallpox and generally ensuring their well-being.
Health rituals.
Yes, and they often involve sacrificing animals, maybe chickens or even a buffalo, followed by a community feast. It's like a spiritual public health measure almost.
Who leads these rituals? Is there a priest figure?
The chapter calls the religious leader the Ngopa. This person acts as a medium, believed to be able to communicate with spirits, maybe through possession, and they also function as a healer, trying to appease spirits to cure sickness.
A medium and a healer.
Yeah. And one little fascinating detail. The Rai apparently see the Milky Way as the 7 Kosi rivers flowing through the sky, a nice link between the heavens and their local geography.
That is lovely. What about death and burial?
Traditionally, they buried their dead quite close to their houses.
Near the home. Interesting.
And for about a month after the death, the family would make daily offerings of food and drink to the spirit of the person who passed.
Maintaining that connection.
Yes. And a very common practice was building a stone rest platform, a shatara, as a memorial.
Oh, I've seen those along trails in Nepal.
Exactly. Often built under a tree, providing shade. A lasting memorial that also serves the community.
A wonderful tradition. And you mentioned the local Rai leader earlier, the lowercase r1. Did they have a role in funerals too?
Well, they were mainly involved in resolving village disputes. But the chapter stresses how communal these events were. Funerals, building memorials, everyone participated, showing strong community bonds.
Okay, that gives a really good picture of the Rai based on this chapter. Now, Bista also discusses the Limbu. How are they distinct?
Right, the Limbu are the second major Kirati group discussed. While they share that Kirati heritage and many similarities with the Rai, there are definite distinctions.
Like what?
Language is a big one. Limbu is its own language, also Tibeto-Burman, but distinct from Rai dialects. And significantly, Limbu has its own script and written literature.
A written tradition. That's a key difference, geographically.
Generally, Limbu settlements were often at lower altitudes than some of the Rai groups we discussed. Their daily life, agriculture, many similarities to the Rai, adapting to their specific part of the hills.
Do they also have the Kipat system?
Yes, the Limbu had their own version of the Kipat communal land system, and their traditional tribute or tax was often referred to as suba. Again, the system changed over time.
And their social structure,
Yeah.
also based on thars.
Yes, they also had social divisions into thars and clans, structuring their society.
What about marriage? Similar rules to the Rai.
Broadly similar principles like preferring monogamy and patriarchality, the wife moving to the husband's home. But the ceremonies were different.
How so?
The Limbu wedding is called Yalagma, and it's described as involving a lot of singing and dancing. Very festive.
Sounds lively.
And a specific custom was for a boy looking for a bride to use a go-between, called a fidangwa, to handle the negotiations with the girl's family.
A formal mediator.
Exactly. The chapter also briefly mentions their specific rules around divorce and remarriage for widows.
And religion. Same beliefs as the Rai or different?
Again, distinct elements alongside perhaps some shared broader ideas. Ancestor worship is vital for the Limbu, too, with specific names for ancestors like Manjana and Yumahendangma.
Different names for the ancestors.
And they have their own religious practitioners called Shamba and Fidangwa who perform priestly duties and rituals.
Different ritual specialists.
Yes. Their death rituals also have unique features, like a ceremony called tungshim and specific burial customs. And they traditionally observe certain days where work was forbidden for religious reasons.
So really, while they fall under the Kirati umbrella, the Rai and Limbu definitely have their own distinct cultural flavors, languages, and traditions.
Absolutely. This chapter does a great job of outlining both the shared heritage and the unique aspects of each group, at least as understood at the time it was written.
It really does. This deep dive, drawing on Bista's work, has shed light on so much: the history, the social fabric, the daily life, the beliefs of the Kirati people in eastern Nepal.
It's just one chapter, of course, but it provides such a valuable snapshot into a really key part of Nepal's incredible cultural diversity. Understanding groups like the Kirati gives you a much richer appreciation for the whole country.
It really does. So for you, our listener, thinking about everything we've touched on, the deep history of the Kirati, their adaptability, the way their traditions like Kipat shaped their lives, how they've maintained distinct identities like Rai and Limbu, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Mm.
In a world that's changing so fast, with modernization and globalization, what can we learn from the resilience of cultures like the Kirati? How have they kept their traditions and communities strong over centuries?
That's a powerful question to ponder.
Maybe this dive has sparked your interest to learn even more, not just about the Kirati, but about all the other fascinating ethnic groups that make up the intricate pattern of Nepal.
Indeed. There's always more to discover, and hopefully this served as a good starting point for that exploration.